My son begged me to put my name on his loan. 19 days later, he blocked my number. And the first person to tell me the truth about where that money went wasn't my son. It was a stranger at his bank. Sit with that for a second, because it took me longer than I want to admit to understand what it meant. A woman I had never met, sitting in an office in Boise, Idaho, knew more about my own son's finances than I did. And she was the one who finally looked me in the eye and said the sentence that changed everything. My name is Ray Calloway. Everyone just calls me Ray. I'm 63 years old. I own a precision machining shop off Franklin Road in Meridian, Idaho, a business I built with my own 2 hands starting in 1991, in a rented bay with 1 lathe and a loan from my own father-in-law that took me 7 years to pay back. I believed for most of my life that if you worked hard and loved your family without conditions, that love came back to you the same way. I was wrong about that. Not the working hard part. The rest of it, this is the story of the worst August of my life. And the one moment inside it I will carry until the day I stop breathing. Standing in the back office of a bank in downtown Boise, watching a woman slide a folder across a desk and say words that cracked something open in me I didn't even know was still closed. But none of it makes sense unless you understand where we started. Because 3 months before that folder ever touched that desk, my son sat across from me at my own kitchen table with fire in his eyes and a business partner I'd only met twice, asking me to sign away everything I'd spent 35 years building. And I said yes. Not because I was foolish. Because I was his father, and I wanted, more than anything, to believe in him one more time. I didn't know it yet, sitting there that night, but that signature was the first domino. And what fell after it would tear this family down to the studs before it built something stronger back up. If stories like this one hit you somewhere real, hit that like button right now before we go further, because what happened next, the silence, the blocked number, the empty storefront, is going to test everything you think you know about loyalty. Let's go back to where it started. I married my wife, Diane, in 1990. 34 years this past June. We built our life on Cotter Lane in Eagle, a quiet town just northwest of Boise. For bedrooms, a detached garage I turned into a workshop, a backyard that opens onto a stand of ponderosa pine. Nothing fancy. Paid off in 2018. I remember standing on that porch the night I mailed the final mortgage payment, thinking I had finally arrived somewhere solid. We raised 2 kids in that house. My daughter, Sarah, is 29. She's an ER nurse at St. Alphonsus downtown, married to a steady, quiet man named Marcus Doyle who does HVAC work. Sarah has never once in her adult life asked me for a dime. Remember that. It matters later. My son, Tyler, is 32. Smart, charming in a way that used to make me proud and now, looking back, makes my stomach tighten. Tyler bounced around for years, working restaurants since he was 19, climbing from busser to line cook to sous chef at a decent steakhouse downtown. For a long time I told myself that was just Tyler finding his footing. Every father tells himself some version of that story. Then early this past May, Tyler called on a Tuesday night and asked if he and Diane and I could sit down. Family dinner, he said. Nothing serious. I should have known right then. Nothing serious is never nothing serious. He showed up with a laptop bag and a business partner I'd met exactly twice, a man named Derek Vance. Mid-30s, expensive watch, a handshake that lingered half a second too long, smiling like he already knew how the conversation would end. He and Tyler had worked together at the steakhouse for 2 years, and somewhere in there decided to open their own place. Coppervine Kitchen, a farm-to-table spot on Main Street downtown. Exposed brick, an open kitchen, a whole concept laid out on a slide deck Tyler had clearly spent weeks building. I'll be honest, I was moved. My son, sitting at my table at 32 years old, finally talking about something with fire in his voice instead of just getting by. Diane squeezed my hand under the table. She saw it too. The number they needed was $365,000. An SBA loan through Trailhead National Bank, the branch on Capitol Boulevard. They had about $60,000 between savings and a small investor. But the bank wanted a personal guarantor with real credit and real collateral before releasing the rest. Dad, Tyler said, and I remember exactly how carefully he said it, like he'd rehearsed it in the car. I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe in this with everything I have. You're not writing a check. You're just believing in me. On paper. I didn't know it yet, but that paper was about to cost me more than money. And the first person to warn me wasn't in that room at all. Before I tell you what my wife said to me that night in bed, hit subscribe, because part 3 is where the first crack in this story shows itself, and you do not want to miss it. Diane was quiet on the drive home that night, and I knew that quiet. 34 years teaches you to read a silence the way you'd read a weather report. "Ray," she finally said, sitting on the edge of our bed, unclipping her earrings. "I want to believe in him too." "I do. But something about that Derek fella. I don't know. He looks at you like he's already spent your money in his head." I told her she was being protective. I told her Tyler had worked restaurants his whole adult life and finally had a real shot, and what kind of father would I be if my own hesitation was the reason he never got it? I told myself that love without risk isn't really love at all. I signed the personal guarantee on a Thursday morning in early May, at a conference table on the second floor of the Trailhead National Branch downtown, across from a loan officer named Angela Reyes. Reading glasses on a chain, a handshake that actually meant something. She walked me through every page slowly, made sure I understood that as guarantor, if the business defaulted, the bank could come after my personal assets. My house, my shop, everything. I nodded along like a man who fully understood what he was agreeing to. I did not fully understand what I was agreeing to. I want to be honest about that, because people ask me. I didn't know it yet, but the next time I sat in that building, it would not be to sign anything. It would be to hear a sentence that ended one version of my life and started another. The first 8 weeks were good. Genuinely good. Cruise in and out of the main street space. Framed permits taped in the front window. Tyler texting me photos of polished concrete floors, a walk-in cooler going in. He called most Sunday evenings, walked me through the budget, asked my opinion on equipment because he knew I understood machinery and I understood money. For 2 months, I felt like the father I always wanted to be. Present. Trusted. Needed the right way instead of the wrong way. Then in late July the calls slowed down. I noticed it the way you notice a clock that stopped ticking. Not all at once. In the sudden quiet where a sound used to be. A Sunday went by with no call. Then another. I texted him. Short replies. "Busy week, Dad. Talk soon." The kind of message you send when you're managing someone, not talking to them. And then on a Tuesday morning in early August, a piece of mail showed up at my house I wasn't expecting. A notice from Trailhead National, addressed to me as guarantor. I stood in my own kitchen, holding that envelope for almost a full minute before I opened it, because some part of me already knew that whatever was inside was going to change the shape of everything I thought I understood about my son. If you've ever had that feeling, the letter in your hand before you've even opened it, drop a comment and tell me. Because part 4 is where I open it. And it is so much worse than I expected. The notice said the business account tied to the loan had missed its scheduled draw reconciliation, and that a payment cycle review was underway. I didn't fully understand the language. I understood the tone. Something was wrong. I called Tyler that night. Straight to voicemail. I called again the next morning. Voicemail again. Over the next 4 days, I called him 11 times, and every single one went to that same flat, automated voice telling me to leave a message after the tone. Then on a Sunday evening, I called one more time, and instead of ringing through like it always had, it went straight to a single tone and disconnected. That specific sound. The sound of a number that's been blocked. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, staring at the screen like it might change its answer if I looked long enough. 32 years, and my son had never once hung up on me, let alone blocked me. I called Diane in and showed her the screen, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do before. Go from confused to frightened in about 4 seconds flat. That's when I called my oldest friend, Gary Delgado. Gary and I have known each other since 1993, back when he ran a diesel repair shop 2 units down from mine. Gary is the kind of man who tells you the truth even when you'd rather he didn't, which is exactly why I called him instead of sitting with it alone. "Ray," he said after I laid the whole thing out over coffee at the diner we've been going to for almost 20 years. "Listen to me. When a grown man blocks his father's number 3 months after that father co-signs a loan for him, that is not a coincidence, and you know it isn't. I don't want to believe that, Gary. I know you don't. But you haven't driven out to that restaurant yet, have you?" I hadn't. So the next morning, before the shop opened, I got in my truck and drove downtown to Main Street myself. I want you to picture what I expected to see. Awnings up, string lights, maybe a soft opening banner, because Tyler had told me 2 weeks earlier they were 3 weeks from opening. What I actually found was a storefront with brown paper, still taped over half the windows. A padlock on the front door that hadn't been there in June. A dumpster out front overflowing with drywall scraps that looked like they'd been sitting for weeks, not days. No lights on inside. No sound. No sign of a single living soul. I stood on that sidewalk for a long time, hands in my jacket pockets, feeling something cold settle into my chest that had nothing to do with the morning air. I didn't know it yet, standing there, but the answers I was looking for were not going to come from my son. They were going to come from the one place I never expected. And it would arrive in 3 days, in a phone call I almost let go to voicemail. If this story has its hooks in you already, hit subscribe now, because part 5 is that phone call, and it changes everything. Welcome back, if you're just joining. Grab your coffee and get comfortable, because this story is about to take a turn you will not see coming. If you've been with me a while, you already know what's coming next. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and if you haven't hit subscribe yet, now is the time, because what happened 3 days after I stood outside that empty restaurant changed the entire direction of my family. The call came on a Thursday morning at 11:40. I was at my shop, standing over a CNC mill running a batch of aluminum housings, when my cell phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Boise area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I am glad I didn't. Mr. Calloway, the voice said. My name is Angela Reyes. I'm a senior loan officer with Trailhead National. We spoke back in May, when you signed as personal guarantor on the Copper Vine kitchen loan. I remember you, I said, and my whole body went still in a way the machinery around me couldn't touch. Mr. Calloway, she said, and there was something careful in her voice, the tone of someone who has had this exact conversation before and knows exactly how much weight it carries. I need you to come into the branch this afternoon if you're able. There are some things, as guarantor, you need to see in person before you make any decisions on your own. I asked her right there, standing next to a running mill with metal shavings curling onto the floor, whether my son was in some kind of trouble. She paused long enough that I heard it. Mr. Calloway, I'd rather walk you through the documentation in person. I don't want to alarm you over the phone with half the picture. I was in my truck 11 minutes later. I sat in that same second-floor conference room where I'd signed my name in May. Except this time, Angela Reyes wasn't alone. There was a man from the bank's fraud and risk department sitting beside her. Younger, quieter, a folder in front of him thick enough that my stomach dropped just looking at it. Mr. Calloway, Angela said, sliding the folder toward me. I'm going to walk you through this slowly. Ask me to stop at any point if you need to. I put my hand flat on the table to keep it from shaking, and I opened that folder, not knowing that in the next 10 minutes, I was going to learn something about my son's own signature that would break something open in me I did not know was still closed. If you've ever opened something you weren't ready for, you know exactly the silence I mean. Hit like right now, because part 6 is what was actually inside that folder, and it is worse than anything I imagined driving over. Here is what that folder told me, laid out in bank statements, drawer request forms, and vendor invoices I read 3 times each, because I genuinely did not want them to be true. The $365,000 loan had been structured to release in construction draws tied to milestones. A common SBA setup. Permits, framing, equipment, build-out, opening inventory. Each draw required documentation, invoices from licensed vendors, signed off by both business partners. Over 10 weeks, roughly $225,000 of that loan had been drawn down. But the restaurant on Main Street, the one I'd stood outside of 3 days earlier with brown paper still taped to the windows, had maybe $45,000 of actual work done on it. I know construction. I've spent 35 years around fabrication and build-out costs. $45,000 of visible progress does not eat $225. The invoices, Angela explained, had come from 3 vendors. One was a legitimate flooring contractor who had done real work and been paid fairly. The other 2, an equipment leasing company and a construction consulting firm called Vance Contracting Group, did not check out. Vance Contracting Group, the fraud officer told me quietly, was registered to a residential address in Nampa, and its listed managing member was Derek Vance. I sat there for a moment, not fully able to process what I was looking at. My son's business partner had apparently created a shell company using his own name, submitted it as a legitimate vendor, and had the bank release loan draws directly into an account he controlled. "Where's my son in this?" I asked, and I heard my own voice come out smaller than I wanted it to. The fraud officer, whose name I later learned was Trevor Kemderim, turned to a specific page. "Mr. Calloway, your son's signature is on 7 of the 9 draw requests. As co-owner, that was required for release. I'm not in a position to tell you what he knew, or didn't know when he signed them. What I can tell you is the pattern of these transfers, moving straight into an account associated with Mr. Vance within 24 to 48 hours of each release, is consistent with what our fraud team classifies as structured diversion. We flagged it internally 2 weeks ago and froze the remaining undispersed balance immediately. That's the only reason there's still $140,000 sitting untouched instead of gone entirely. I want to be honest about what I felt sitting in that chair, because it matters more than anything else in this story. I did not feel rage first. I felt something closer to grief. The specific kind that sits low in your chest like a stone you swallowed whole. Because in that folder, I wasn't just looking at fraud. I was looking at 7 pages with my son's own handwriting on them. And I did not yet know if that handwriting belonged to a victim or a participant. If you've ever had to ask that question about your own child, you know there is no worse silence in the world. Subscribe now, because part 7 is the one thing Angela said to me that afternoon that I will never forget for the rest of my life. Mr. Calloway, Angela said gently, closing the folder halfway. I called you in today because as guarantor, you're going to receive formal notice of default proceedings within the next 10 business days. If this isn't resolved, I wanted you to understand the full picture before that letter arrives, and before you make any decisions, financial or otherwise, based on incomplete information. I've seen guarantors panic and do things that hurt them worse. I didn't want that for you. I asked her why the bank would go out of its way to do that for me. She looked at me for a moment, and something in her face softened just slightly. Because you sat in that chair in May and asked me 3 separate times what happens to my house if this goes wrong, she said. Some people don't ask that question at all. I remembered you. I drove home that afternoon and didn't say a word to Diane for almost 20 minutes. Just sat at the kitchen table with my hands folded, staring at nothing, while she stood at the stove not cooking anything, just waiting. Because 34 years teaches a woman to know when silence needs room to breathe before it can turn into words. Ray, she finally said, talk to me. I told her everything. Every page, every number, every name. I watched her face go through the same journey mine had. Disbelief, then grief, then something harder settling underneath it. That Derek, she said quietly. I told you. I told you the night before you signed. You did, I said. I'm not going to pretend you didn't. But here's what I still didn't know, sitting at that kitchen table that evening. I didn't know where Tyler actually was. I didn't know whether my son was hiding from me because he'd helped steal from his own father, or hiding from me because he was drowning in something he hadn't caused and didn't know how to face. And I was about to find out that the answer was far more complicated and far sadder than either version I had already built in my head. I called Gary that night and asked him to meet me the next morning, before the shop opened, where we could talk without an audience. Gary listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, which for Gary is close to a miracle. When I finished, he sat back in the folding chair by my workbench and said the thing I needed to hear, even though I didn't want to. Ray, you need a lawyer before you need a conversation with your son. Get the facts locked down first. Because if you go to Tyler hot, whatever he tells you, you won't be able to trust it. And neither will anyone else later, if this ends up in a courtroom. He was right, and I knew it. What I didn't know yet was that the very next document I read would either confirm my worst fear about my son, or completely rewrite it. If you've ever had a friend tell you a hard truth you needed to hear, tell me in the comments. And hit like before part 8, because that document changes everything. The next morning I called an attorney a client of mine had used for a business dispute a couple years back. A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miriam Castillo with an office off State Street. I sat across from her desk and told her everything Angela Reyes had shown me. Miriam listened, took notes in small, precise handwriting, and then said something that reframed the entire situation for me. Ray, she said, setting her pen down. As guarantor, you have a right to request the full loan file directly from the bank, independent of whatever your son tells you. I'd also strongly recommend you find out where your son actually is right now, because there is a real difference under the law, and honestly under any decent understanding of fairness, between a business partner who helped divert funds and one who got used by someone he trusted and is now too ashamed to answer his own father's calls. I hadn't considered that second possibility with any real weight until she said it out loud. I had been so certain driving home from the bank the day before that my son had chosen this, that he'd looked at his own father's signature on a guarantee and decided it was worth spending to fund someone else's greed. I had built that story in 24 hours flat, and I had built it out of hurt, not evidence. Miriam requested the full loan file that afternoon. It arrived by secure email late that night, and I stayed up until nearly 1 in the morning reading through every page at my kitchen table with a legal pad beside me, cross-referencing dates the way I would cross-reference a machining tolerance sheet, because that is simply how my brain works when I am trying not to fall apart. And there, buried in an email chain the bank had pulled as part of their fraud review, dated 3 weeks earlier, was something that changed the entire shape of this story. An email from Tyler to Derek, timestamped 11:47 at night. Derek, I checked the Vance contracting invoices against the actual work on site, and the numbers don't match up. Where's the rest of that money going? I need an answer tonight, or I'm calling Angela at the bank myself tomorrow morning. Derek's reply, sent 4 minutes later. Tyler, calm down. It's a timing issue with supplier deposits. I'll walk you through it in person. Don't call the bank. You'll tank the draw schedule and kill the whole project over a paperwork lag. Trust me. I sat there at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning with that email glowing on my laptop screen, and something in my chest that had been clenched for a full day finally slightly let go. My son had seen it. My son had asked the exact question I would have asked. And then somehow, between that email and the day he blocked my number, something had gone very wrong. I still didn't know if it was fear or shame or something worse that had kept him silent since. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find my son in a place I never in 1,000 years would have guessed to look. And what I saw there would tell me more about who he really was than any bank folder ever could. If a piece of evidence has ever changed your entire read on a person, hit subscribe and tell me. Part 9 is where I finally find him. Gary helped me track him down 2 days later. Not through detective work. Through his own son, who still worked kitchen shifts with a few of the same line cooks Tyler had come up through the ranks with. One of them mentioned casually over a beer that Tyler had picked up night shifts at a place called the Roadhouse Grill out on Fairview. A diner, not a restaurant, working the overnight fry station for cash, using a name that wasn't quite his own on the schedule. I drove out there myself at 11 at night and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I went in, because I honestly did not know what version of my son I was about to find. He was standing at a flat-top griddle under fluorescent lights, apron-stained, hair flat with sweat, 25 pounds lighter than the confident man who'd sat at my kitchen table in May with a slide deck full of dreams. He looked up, saw me through the pass window, and I watched every ounce of color drain out of his face. We stood outside by the dumpsters behind that diner for almost an hour. He cried before I did, which surprised me, because Tyler hadn't cried in front of me since he was maybe 13 years old. Dad, he said, voice breaking on nearly every word. I found out what Derek was doing back in July. I confronted him. He swore he'd fix it. Said if I went to the bank, he'd claim I signed off on everything knowingly, that it would look like both of us were in on it together, and it would be my word against his with my name right there on 7 signed draw requests. I panicked. I thought if I could just find a way to cover what he took before anyone noticed, I could fix it quiet and nobody would ever have to know how stupid I'd been. I picked up the night shift here to start paying it back myself. I blocked your number because I couldn't stand hearing your voice and lying to you. And I couldn't stand telling you the truth either. I didn't know how to do either one. I stood there in that parking lot at midnight and looked at my son, exhausted, ashamed, cooking hash browns under an assumed name to try and quietly undo a disaster he hadn't caused. And I felt something shift permanently in how I understood this entire story. He was not innocent. I want to be honest about that too, because people ask me. He'd been naive. He'd been slow to act. And 7 of his own signatures sat in that bank file, whether his intentions were good or not. But he had not conspired to steal from his own father. He had been manipulated by a man he trusted, frozen by fear of exactly the kind of story I'd spent 4 days building in my own head, and too proud or too broken to make the one phone call that would have actually helped him. I didn't hug him in that parking lot. I want to be honest about that too. What I did was put my hand on his shoulder the way I used to when he was small, and I said, "Get in the truck. We're going to fix this the right way, starting tonight. But you're going to tell me everything, every single piece of it, on the way." If you've ever had to separate someone's mistake from their character, you know exactly what that moment felt like. Like this video and subscribe now, because part 10 is where the truth finally reaches the courts, and where Derek Vance's past finally catches up to him. The next 10 days moved fast, and they moved with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt since I first opened my machine shop back in 1991. Miriam Castillo helped Tyler prepare a full documented statement for the bank's fraud division, laying out that late-night email exchange and everything that followed. Trevor and Kemderham's team cross-referenced it against the shell company records for Vance Contracting Group and confirmed what we already suspected. Derek Vance had done this before, under a different company name, at a different bank, 2 years earlier in Nampa, with a different unlucky partner who simply never had the resources to fight back. In early September, the Ada County Prosecuting Attorney's Office filed charges against Derek Vance for wire fraud and forgery related to the diverted draws. Because the bank had frozen the remaining $140,000 before it could be touched, and because Tyler's cooperation gave prosecutors a clean paper trail, restitution proceedings opened to recover as much of the missing $180,000 as possible from Derek's personal assets, which it turned out included a boat he'd bought in June with money that should have gone into a walk-in cooler. The bank restructured the loan. As guarantor, and given the fraud findings, I worked with Miriam and Angela Reyes to negotiate the personal guarantee down substantially, tied only to the legitimately used funds. Roughly $78,000, once the flooring contractor's real invoice was verified. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't the $365,000 nightmare I'd been staring down alone at my kitchen table 2 weeks earlier, either. Tyler sold his car, took the bus for months while he worked 2 jobs, the diner overnights and a line cook shift at a different restaurant during the day, and paid down his half of that remaining balance dollar by dollar, month by month, the way I once paid back my own father-in-law for that first lathe. I didn't pay it off for him. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I helped him understand it. I sat with him at that kitchen table more than once, going over the numbers, but I did not simply hand him a way out. Some debts, even the ones that aren't entirely your fault, are worth paying with your own 2 hands. Because that's the only way the lesson actually holds. I sat in the courtroom the day Derek Vance was formally charged, and I watched a man who had once shaken my hand a half-second too long stare straight ahead, expression flat, like none of it had ever touched him at all. But there is one more part of this story I have to tell you. Because a story about betrayal isn't complete without the person who never once wavered. And I almost missed what she'd tried to tell me, months before any of this ever happened. If you're still with me this deep into the story, drop a comment right now, because part 11 is where I find out who really tried to warn me all along. Somewhere in the middle of all this, sorting through old text messages while trying to reconstruct a timeline for Miriam, I found something I had completely missed back in May. A message from Sarah, sent the night after that family dinner where Tyler and Derek first pitched the restaurant. I'd read it at the time half distracted and never really let it land. Dad, I don't want to be the negative one, but something about Derek makes my skin crawl. I've met guys like that at the hospital, family members of patients, the kind who talk a big game and disappear the second something goes wrong. Please just be careful before you put your name on anything. Love you. I'd sent back a quick, thanks sweetheart, I'll be careful, and moved on with my night. Never once following up. Never once asking her what exactly she'd seen in him that worried her so much. I called Sarah on a Sunday evening in late September and asked her to come over for dinner. Just the 2 of us and Diane. No agenda mentioned. When she got there, I sat her down at that same kitchen table and told her the whole story, start to finish. And then I told her I owed her an apology I should have given her back in May. You saw this coming before any of us, I told her. And I brushed it off, because I wanted so badly to believe in your brother's dream that I didn't want to hear anything that got in the way of it. That wasn't fair to you. Sarah has never asked me for money in her entire adult life. Not once. Not for her wedding. Not for a car. Not when she and Marcus were saving for their first house, eating the same simple meals 4 nights a week, just to make it happen faster. She has a dream of her own. One she's mentioned quietly maybe 3 times in 5 years and never pushed. A small community health clinic she wants to help start one day, for patients without insurance. The kind of need she sees firsthand on every overnight shift. In October, Diane and I sat down and restructured our own estate planning with Miriam's help. Not out of guilt, and not to buy anyone's loyalty, because loyalty like Sarah's was never for sale in the first place. We set up a dedicated trust, funded initially with $92,000 from our savings, earmarked specifically to help launch that clinic when she's ready, with the rest of our estate divided fairly between both our children once we're gone, structured this time with the kind of protections I wish I'd understood back in May. When I told her about the trust, sitting at that same kitchen table, Sarah cried harder than I'd seen her cry since her own wedding day. And she told me through tears that she never once did any of it expecting anything back. I know that, I told her. That's exactly why you're getting it. There is one more thing I need to tell you before this story ends. Where Tyler is now, and what I've finally come to understand about love, trust, and the 4 days that nearly cost me everything. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe because part 12 is the ending you've been waiting for. It's been 3 months now since that night outside the diner on Fairview. Coppervine Kitchen never opened, not under that name, not in that space. Tyler walked away from the lease entirely rather than try to salvage something built on a foundation like that. He's back working as a sous chef at a restaurant downtown. Saving slowly, quietly, talking now about maybe trying again someday. Smaller, simpler, with real partners he's actually vetted, and a father who will ask a lot more questions next time before he signs anything. Derek Vance's case is still moving through the courts. Restitution has recovered close to 40% of what he took so far, and Trevor Nkemderim tells me the fraud division has connected him to at least one more victim in a similar scheme out of Nampa. Whatever happens to him now, it likely won't just be about me and my son anymore. I think about that day standing outside the Capitol Boulevard branch a lot. The way I felt walking in, not knowing whether I was about to learn my son had betrayed me or been failed by someone he trusted. I think about how close I came to letting 4 days of fear write the whole rest of the story before I had a single fact to stand on. Here's what I've come to understand, sitting on that same porch on Cotter Lane most evenings now, with Diane beside me, watching the light fade behind the ponderosa pines. Love without questions isn't really love. It's just hope wearing love's clothes. The people who deserve your trust, the ones like my daughter who saw danger coming and told me anyway, even when it wasn't what I wanted to hear, they don't need grand gestures to prove it. They just show up quietly, consistently, long before anyone's watching, and long after it would have been easier not to. My son is still my son. He made a serious mistake, born out of fear more than greed, and he is still, every single week, paying the real cost of that mistake with his own hands, which is exactly where it belongs. My daughter never had to prove a single thing to me, and I'll spend whatever years I have left making sure she knows that I finally see it. Some nights now, I sit at that kitchen table with my legal pad still out of habit, and I think about Angela Reyes sliding that folder across her desk and saying the words that started all of it. You need to see this before you do anything. I've come to believe that's true of almost everything in this life. See it clearly first, then decide who deserves what you're about to give them. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. I will see you in the next story.